Okay, hello to some early birds I can see coming in. Just so you don't feel uncomfortable and wonder what's going on, I'm just going to give us another minute or so for the room to fill up. Hey, hi, Victor. Um, it's the last talk of the day, so let's all try and just drag out that bit of energy for the last bit. Let's make sure we fill the chat with questions, with comments. Well, let's fill the Q&A with questions. Makes it easy for me to track. Feel free to just talk about anything in the chat. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending MapCap and for contributing to what has been an incredible day. This event gets better for me every year, and today just has to be incredible. Every talk has been mind-blowing, has been thought-provoking, has either led to an action that I can think about tomorrow or the acceptance that I'm going to be thinking about this for a while. And I just said to the speakers, we have potentially the most riotous set of talks today in terms of how they affect the audience. We are going to be hearing from two people who have, like me actually, lived in two very different regimes or parts of the world. We have the tagline of communism versus capitalism. First thing I want to do is, you're not hearing arguments for one versus the other. What you're hearing is points of view from people who have a really unique perspective. Rules, there is no stupid question unless it's asked early enough, as in basically if a question is asked very early, that's just good practice. That's the kind of thing we do on a map. So for anybody who's new to MapCamp, feel free to ask the most fundamental of questions. That's the only way we learn. We do have subject matter experts and some people who have been involved in mapping for a long time. Some of the speakers haven't, which is actually really, really valuable in some ways. It gives the audience a chance for the speaker to learn about the domain of mapping. But really feel free to ask questions. We're going to keep some of them, and they guide us as well in how we create and sort of create the format for MapCamp. So we have our first speaker, Chris. Chris, I know, one of the reasons I'm sitting here today, one of the early people I interacted with and thought this community maybe worthwhile me sticking around. Chris is from Poland. Where are you actually now physically, Chris? You're in London.
In Poland, Poznań.
Poland, good stuff. And is going to give us a unique view on capitalism and communism from the analysis of companies. So Chris, why not introduce yourself, what you do if it's relevant, and perhaps what motivated you to talk about this today?
So I work for the DXC Research. Previously, it was the Leading Edge Forum. I help people create maps for various reasons. And actually answering this last question about what motivated me to create this presentation, this map, is quite difficult for me, but I've just came to the conclusion that it's all about the observation that the external world, or perhaps the state I'm living in, is failing me, and is failing in a very ugly way. And I've created this map and this analysis purely for my psychological comfort. So I will feel slightly better because now I think I understand what mechanisms rule it and what can be about it and what I will do about it. So in the beginning, it was supposed I was quite cheerful and I wanted to do a very light-hearted talk, compare communism and capitalism. I thought it will be like something like an unexpected journey, and this is a nod towards The Hobbit, right? You know, the movie, quite pleasant one. But a little bit during the preparation, I had to change this approach because it's not really an unexpected journey, but rather The Descent, which is a horror, a British horror from 2005. Yep, and I started mapping the space just to figure out where I will end up. And the results aren't quite expected. Before I proceed with the map, because it is based on a map, I just wanted to mention that I helped to create a worldly mapping certification and certificate, and I have a discount code, quite significant one, for the first 5% which will message me on Twitter. Now, the communism versus capitalism. I thought about who should be the anchor, and I'm quite selfish because it's me. I mean, it's not me personally, but it's a generalist me personal, Simon uses me versus we concept. And what this person wants to survive and spread. It's quite unfortunate term. Perhaps there are many better, but I need to reuse the same need for different components. So survive means do not die, and spread means either have children or create ideas which will survive longer than the person itself. Now, for the person to survive, this person needs to acquire resources. But living on your own is quite difficult. So what we usually observe is that people belong to different groups. Groups help those people acquire resources. The group or groups in general, in addition to acquiring resources, they have the internal function which distributes resources. And there is a relationship of belonging which ties individual to one or more groups. And this is already pretty fascinating because here is a quite, it's quite, I would say, uncomfortable set of components, because acquiring groups, they compete in a Darwinian sense. It means that those that are the fittest will survive. Of course, the fitness function is just that they will survive. So groups compete for resources between each other. Some competition is perhaps friendly, as Simon says, it's more of collaboration. Some competition is quite fierce. And groups try to distribute resources they have won amongst the members. And this already poses a question of how do you distribute resources internally in such a way that the group remains competitive or can survive externally? There are different approaches. Capitalism and communism use different mechanisms, but this is already a very difficult question, because if you value distributing resources without violence, or perhaps without using status or similar stuff, and solving challenges in a peaceful way, the group on the external border still needs to remain competitive, which almost always means it has to have a violent capability. It creates an internal conflict within a group. Now, there is the aspect of culture, because groups ties individuals through culture. Culture can get codified into the law. And there's the status, which creates hierarchies within the group. Or in the other way, the group decides how to distribute resources based on the status of individual group members. This is important, that it is the group that assigns status to individuals, because status doesn't exist without the group. And you can find quite interesting literature that power is where the group thinks the power is. Now, there is a feedback cycle going on, which frankly is one of the most worrying things in this entire map, which is, if you are a person of high status, you can influence the culture, which means that you can influence how the group will distribute resources, which means that your status will go up. And basically this loop can spin in almost any place, and any mechanism that exists within a group can be gained by people seeking to gain higher status. Now, the situation gets even more complicated if you add the concept of state to the map, because the state brings a whole set of very codified components. One of them is enforcement, and this is how do you make individuals to behave with the best interest of the group. And this is quite interesting, because for majority of Western democracies, this enforcement component almost didn't exist. There were laws, you were forbidden from doing things, but enforcement of behaviors didn't exist. And in communistic world, it was mastered perhaps to uncomfortable levels, including social engineering. Now there is the monetary policy, and I have put this component only to mention that in the, let's say, Soviet bloc, the government decided where the money should go. In the capitalistic countries, rich get the money mostly because the money is printed and handed to banks, and banks will lend the money into the market, but they will lend those money only to people who already have assets. That's why universal basic income is better than the existing monetary approach, but it falls short of Chinese planning and investing money into sectors, because then China connects together enforcement and monetary policy, and enforcement is slightly weaker because money are used to incentivize people to work in a certain direction. Western countries are not quite good at doing it yet, but are learning quite fast. There is the suppression component, and this is what do you do with people who are unhappy with the external politics of the group. Again, in the West, in democratic societies, this component virtually didn't exist. And even if it did exist, one had to be very careful when suppressing mass movement of people, because it could cost you your position in the government. The Soviet or communist-based states, they are actually quite good at suppressing people, even the entire, perhaps not nations, but larger ethnicities. And finally, there is the survival policy of the state, which is pretty much the same for the group, for the individual person, and for the state, which is to survive. And there is a bigger loop going on, which means that through the status, you can influence culture, you can influence law, you can influence state and get even more resources. Now, you need to add to this that they are confrontation skills which you need in order to operate in this particular scenario, and you need to be able to stand up for your needs, because not everything can be codified in law, and culture can be gamed to some extent, which almost requires you to be able to be aggressive, because confrontation can happen on multiple levels. If you have a very nice environment and a peaceful society, and all the mechanisms in that society are working, then you probably can survive just by talking to other people and negotiating your way into the future. But if you have a society which has hostile members or gamed mechanisms, then frankly, you don't have anything else left than to use more and more direct impact on the environment around you. And this is the space where we are entering perhaps a little bit of psychology or psychoanalytics. I don't know exactly what, but there are societies which try to suppress the mechanism of confrontation and rely only on cultural and law rules. And they try to pretend that confrontation isn't required, or at least is not welcome. And this creates an internal conflict within people, which is also quite dangerous to those people and to the society in general. Some other groups, or perhaps schools of thoughts, mention integration, that we should be more, let's say, more creative in solving internal conflicts without causing or without using physical violence. And there is, of course, the concept of deep me, because humans tend to be rationalizing rather than rational, meaning they most of the time they don't know what they want and what they are doing and why. They just look for excuses why to do certain things, rather than doing certain things because that's the rational thing to do. And now when I look at it, I've wondered whether there is a solution to the power accumulation problem. I thought transparency, but transparency works only in small groups, because if you have a big group or a state, there is no way that every citizen in a state will be able to supervise international policy. That's not going to happen. What is more, if the power accumulation pattern is running in the state and multiple state bodies at the same time, different people are trying to game it, and you cannot eliminate all of those people, that means that the state will degrade. And frankly, this isn't anything new. And I forgot who was it. Probably Plato described the process of degradation of the state. So this is like a knowledge which has more than 2000 years. And what usually happens is once the state degrades to a point where tolerable discomfort for individual is exceeded, individuals seek action. And this is what is also codified as the right of revolution. Right of revolution, I found to be an equivalent of a power with. It essentially means that people who are at the disadvantage in a given system and see no hope for the future form a coalition and try to overthrow existing government or existing ruling group or whatever. Now, this isn't pure power with, because at the same time, they may use power to enable those who are in even worse position but cannot defend themselves. And they also use power over the old ruling group to essentially remove them. And this actually forms a cycle of big resets across the history. We have a history of riots and we have a history of wars. And after those wars, when the level of living in the population is equaled, there is a rather peaceful growth because everyone is more or less in the same situation. Now, I was thinking about about potential solution to the power accumulation pattern. And I'm quite hesitant to bring it in because it's also important, how do you measure power? How do you measure status? Because I have noticed that in in a number of papers, what is considered to be power is socioeconomic power. And this is actually just one dimension of power because I have found this game. This is the chart of how many people in Norway don't have children. And if you do remember from the map, it's like the primary purpose of an individual is to spread. So it essentially means, this chart shows that nearly 25% of men doesn't have children, and this population has been growing over the 3 past decades, as it is shown. This data is valid only for Norway. And the interesting question is, are we talking about a situation where men do not want children? Or are we talking about a situation where men cannot find a right partner, or the other way around? Because it may be the situation that women cannot find the right partner and they decide rather to use people who are already fathers to form to have children. And this is actually, again, a very dangerous situation because focusing on socioeconomic power leads potentially to a group of people who have seriously unmet needs, and they are, or they may be, on the brink of turning to those revolutionary solutions. And I have came across the term beta uprising, I think, which is associated with the incel community. And this, at least a couple of people seems to be waiting for something like this to happen. Now, if you think where is the economic power, it almost looks like it's in the top 1% because those people have more than 2,000 times more resources than those people. And at this point, I wonder where should you be focused, or where I should be putting my focus in terms of trying to make situation here in Poland or anywhere better. Are we talking about redistribution of goods within a class, or are we really talking about looking at the 1%? And frankly, 1% people, they have such a high status, they don't need ethics, they don't need to fight climate change, they don't need to fight financial slavery because they can escape with their resources no matter what. That's the whole purpose of having high status. That's the whole purpose why people compete for status, because if you are reasonably high in the hierarchy, you can essentially overrule everyone else in the society. So 3 things to think about. People compete for status. And in the process of this competition, they game and destroy the state and the system which makes life possible for everyone else. Over time, this becomes unbearable and revolution kicks in. Second point is that companies, and just companies or businesses in general, can dampen these dynamics because they can exclude people who show unhealthy competitive attitude. But this is not true for states because states cannot expel people who are overly competitive. And finally, it looks like stability requires some sacrifices. For example, if you agree that, I mean, and this is a very difficult part for me. If there is a chance that the society, as it was shown in the diagram where some men cannot have children or don't have children, and if you think that this is because they cannot find partners, if you agree that those people are low status men, then the question is, what do you want to do with them? Because it looks like there are 2 options for them. One is the Japanese way of hikikomori, rejected by society, closed in their rooms, not interacting with the society. And the second one is like going into in the more aggressive way and causing this harm to the society. At the same time, you may want to think about high status people who sit on the top of the hierarchy. And what do you want to do with them? If they can overrule almost everyone else, yeah, then what's the hope for us? And the other thing is that perhaps we could change the definition of status because it's the group which decides what is valuable. I don't know if this is possible because of the deep me and what people value and how much of this value comes from, let's say, their unconscious desires and biological imperatives. But if that would be possible, then perhaps thinking or valuing people more who do something for the community instead of those who are high in power could be one way forward. I don't have any answers. Those are just 3 things to think about. I mean, I will be thinking about those for the more than I'm willing to admit. Thank you. Questions?
Oh, wow. Okay. Where do we start with this one? Because there are some statements in there. Some are hugely provocative. The problem is I've got the answer, right? So I needed to read this. We create stability through the sacrifice of company ownership, right? Through shares. We give it to everybody, which raises to the workforce, and we do that equally based on nothing. Not based on anything other than you're a member of the state. So it's got absolutely no status applied to it. That raises their status, economic and societal. Problem solved.
It does work for a company, not for the entire society. Yes, that's possible in that way.
For every company, right? So if the society did it for every company, does it not fix it? Now tell me, is that capitalism or is it communism?
So if you do it for every company, then status is relative, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm being a little bit provocative myself there. You've shared this. Oh, yes, you've gone and shared this out to the group. CV made a really good comment around the childless men, creating other sorts of generative legacies. Children are one main option, but not the only one. Would you please expand on that, CV?
Oh, sure. It's been a feminist point for the last 150 years to detach your value as a female or a woman from your status as a mother or a child producer, because that has historically in sexist communities been the reason why women have existed. And so that's been one thing. But also we know that if everyone has this procreative impulse and it goes unchecked, we'll live, the earth can't support it. And there are other ways of being generative and creative and contributing to a legacy. And if we understand generativity as the highest part of human development, we also can expand on this sense of what is a contribution, what is a legacy. And so it's scary when you bring up incels or China to talk about this issue, but there are a lot of men and a lot of people in general who find great value in creating and leaving behind things that are not other human beings.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with this point. It's what was important for me in this space is that it's all about the perception of having having unmet needs, right? So this is like almost it's like trying to show people that there are different ways of living where they think what they wanted wasn't granted by the society.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so it's like it's this concept of being unhappy almost, which is the real danger. It's not the objective state of the matter.
And would it not be fair to say there's a two-sided thing, that perhaps some of the changes in our perceptions, our expectations for life? Am I valuable? Do I mean something in my society if I don't have a child? And can I be taught, even if my overall society doesn't think that that's a way to live, can I be taught how to actually embody that, empower myself to live like that anyway? Really interesting. We're supposed to be doing a couple of minutes of just lightning questions, but I feel like this one might go on. I'm just very curious, Andrew, haven't included you. Have you got any thoughts on this before you speak to this? Oh, you're in mute.
No, it's an interesting perspective, and I haven't thought about it like that. I think first, the idea that society can grant you anything is foreign to me, and I didn't even think that people could live with this expectation that the world or the society owes them something. I'm not saying that it's it's my or this view of the world is good or healthy. It's just my life experience didn't let me to believe that I can have such expectations. And it's not only about myself, but observing people around me. I perceive and I hear the suffering, though, and I recognize it. I wouldn't know what to do about it. Yeah.
And I'm going to save this till after your talk, which is up next. But I'm going to ask you, and I'll just leave you to think about it, how this has changed you. Do you think that's empowered you to be free of these sort of inbuilt expectations, or do you think that's reduced your quality of life in any way? I'm gonna ask you to leave that answer for the next bit, and I will repeat it. I did want to make one little connection just between, so a comment on CV's generative legacies that childless men could create. So I watched a documentary on India and Egypt, and the effect that gender selection, whether by the parents or by the society, has had 30, 40 years down the line on their rape figures, and why those figures are not absent in China, where they've had a similar sort of policy, but of course they have a very different state in terms of how free people feel to feel that something is expected of them. So I find that interesting, and also just those two societies where we do have an incel culture, a localized incel culture that is really to do with, I've done all the right things, I've got to this age, I should have this. So those expectations, can be quite dangerous if they're suitably emotive. I want us to dive into the next talk. It's a very similar theme. You're in the same country at the moment, and I suppose some of the experiences are similar. I'd like you to introduce yourself, Andra, a little bit about your background and why you've chosen to speak to us about this topic today.
Yeah, my background my professional background doesn't have much to do with the topic of today, but my life does. So I was born in Romania. I lived my childhood and teenage years, or first, yeah, in Romania during the harshest years of the totalitarian regime which was in power at the time. I lived the past 20 years in the UK, and in between I lived in Germany, in France, in Italy, and I worked all over the world. I'm interested in politics and in international politics because our lives are under the systems we live in, if we want it or not. Yeah, so that's why I choose to speak about it. Simon asked me to speak about it. And it's, for me, I would say, unusual to talk about these issues. So just earlier I spoke about finance and green economy. So to talk about my life or what I think about it, it's unusual and emotional. Yeah.
Hey, bring your whole self to map camp. We are not one thing.
Yeah.
People see us through one lens of our life, and I think it's just as valuable to bring a completely new one, but one that is just as authentic, if not more, right? It's probably closer to your core identity than what you do as a job.
Yeah, so I'll share my screen, yeah? Yeah?
Thanks, Andrew, please.
1 second. Slideshow. Yep. So it's a personal view. I'm not trying to convince you of anything, really. I am aware that what I'm sharing with you is not very common. And it's simply because it's a combination of places where I live. So take it as a story, really. Nope, here it is. This is me in Berlin at Potsdamer Platz, probably 15 years ago. And what seems like a very touristy photo, it's actually a very significant photo for me. I'm standing with 1 foot in what was before Eastern Berlin, and with one in the west, and that line is where the Berlin Wall was. The thing is that I have seen the Berlin Wall during the communist times in '84, I think. And I have a photo in front of it. It's not this one, but it's not very different actually, because this is what you could see from the eastern side. You couldn't basically come close to the wall. Armed soldiers were patrolling in front of you with dogs. And this was in front of Brandenburger Gate, but otherwise there was a double wall on the eastern side. You were not even allowed to go close to the wall. So to sit now with one leg in one world and one in the other world was a bit unreal. And actually, I think this presentation today is from that position, with one leg in the east and one leg in the west. I'm not arguing neither for a communist system or a capitalist system. I'm an advocate for democracy. And I think that democracy, it's a radical idea. It's not a boring system. It's not something in the background. And for democracy to exist, it requires us as individuals to take responsibility and defend it. These systems, neither the capitalist one or the communist one, are stable systems. We might think so because they last long enough to give us the impression that they are permanent and they are there forever. However, during my lifetime, and I'm not antique, trust me, I've seen a few changes from system A to system B. And it doesn't even matter, it's from the left to right or from the right to left. There are similarities between them. So I lived this in Romania and I'm living it right now in the UK. In Romania in the 90s, so I was a student when the communism apparently collapsed, but it didn't fully collapse. It just, reformed itself. And we went through a transition period towards something which could have been called capitalism. I'm not sure it is, it was, or post-communism. And something that I studied for a while was how Romania changed from a monarchy to communism post 45. So for Romania, for example, the end of the World II is not something that we celebrate with big happiness, because this is when the country was occupied by the Soviet Union for a while. And it was disaster. In the UK, right now, we do see very specific changes happening. We don't know exactly where we are going, but it's very clear that we are moving into a very different system than before. Maybe it doesn't look like this to many of you, but to me, the far right and the far left are more similar than different. Anne Applebaum is a historian and a journalist. She wrote extensively about the Soviet world, and she has quite an interesting perspective on these similarities. I happen to share this view with her. The first similarity is that a small clique is taking power. So the power accumulation that Chris was talking about earlier, it's happening in both extreme systems very fast. So is this transition I would like to tell you about for those of you who are not in the UK or don't know how fun we are having here. Oh God.
Like you two colluded on your talks, by the way. It's just, it's brilliant the way they're just smashing together two very similar, same interface, different approaches. Love it.
Yeah, exactly. So this transition, actually, do we have a lot of time in this transition to change things, or what is going on? So I'll tell you a brief story here. This is a dinner in Bucharest. This is how people have fun in Bucharest. They take lunch for 5 hours and they talk about the world. And I was in my grandparents' house and I was a kid, and at the head of the table, there was an old man that I didn't recognize, and he was very elegant. And I asked my grandmother, who was that guy who, got that, let's say, place which deserves or shows respect or something. He was not from our family. And my grandmother told me, he's Judge Libezanu and he stayed for 17 years in prison. Now, I knew the other people at the table, and I knew how much they stayed in prison. My uncles, all the other people. So I calculated with my child mind, there are 50 years of prison at this table. So how the hell they didn't see it coming? And trust me, they didn't. So they thought that when Romania was occupied by a foreign power, and when this foreign power started putting them in prison, and they went very systematically in this process, they thought it cannot last for whatever reasons. It's not right, it's not fair, the democratic institutions will resist, other countries will help us because, you know, it's not fair, whatever. They didn't see it coming. There is no hope. There is no world which grant you any freedom or any rights. Now, there are people who see it coming. And when we look at the UK, the US, or all the countries where you have authoritarian regime being installed, these people shout, you know, this guy is a famous psychologist, and this was his tweet when Trump was being elected, you know, dear people from the future. I don't know what we will say to others who will come generations after Brexit, and we will tell them, dear people from the future, we were here during Brexit, we've seen it coming, we knew what was about to hit us. Yeah, and we tried to do whatever we could, but we couldn't do much. And I have to tell you that when dictatorships are being established, even if you see it coming and you make a lot of noise, there is no special sign. You know, there will be nobody on BBC who will take a stand and say, by the way, guys, we look more like a dictatorship now. Or, by the way, guys, the corruption is so widespread because we look more like Romania in the 90s. No, they will not say that. So it's happening, yeah? So it's up to us to see what we see and recognize it for what it is. So this transition, it's short. And once it happens and the clique consolidated the power, there is a new normal. Okay, what is normal? What is normal in state B? It's not what was normal in state A. So let's look how the normal looks like in UK in 2021. So according to Hannah Arendt, who is was a fabulous philosopher, and he wrote a book about totalitarianism. It's the Bible, trust me, read it. She says the following: before mass leaders seize the power to fit reality to their lies, their propaganda is marked by its extreme contempt for facts as such. For in their opinion, fact depends entirely on the power of men who can fabricate it. Now, I can have hundreds of screenshots with various fabricated facts in the past 5 years during Brexit. You have your choice, but this is a feature, is not a bug. Second, the news today or yesterday. This fabulous guy who was a former Minister of Health during the bungled response to pandemics was promoted to be the UN Special Representative of Financial Innovation and Climate Change for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. What Africa did to this guy? I mean, all the people who work in climate change and financial innovation must feel completely insulted. Everybody's insulted. But again, this is not a bug, this is a feature. Totalitarianism in power invariably replaces all first-rate talents, regardless of their sympathies. And with those crackpots and fools whose lack of intelligence and creativity is still the best guarantee of their loyalty. This guy will be loyal to whoever put him here because he obviously has no competence which would qualify him for this job. Empty shelves. I grew up with this. I know the story. Now, again, this is not a bug, it's a feature. Manufacturing shortages, it's a measure of controlling the population. I can tell you that when you start missing things, or when you cannot count of, finding petrol or various things that you need, you start spending more time planning your life around. What do you cook for your children if you found this or that? If you can go visit your sick mother, no, because you don't have petrol. People who die because they cannot have access to petrol to go to the hospital when they need it. I lived through that. I wrote about that. So if you want, have a check of my Medium account, where I'm regularly triggered by the Brexit disaster to write about this comparison. Shortages are a mean of control. There is no way that a country like the UK would need to go through that. Now, corruption, again, I could have 100 screens. All the PPE contracts given to the friends, the neighbors, the pub neighbor, contracts undeclared, even this guy, corruption for curtains. It's so ridiculous, but it's true. Now, another point, which is very important. The language changes during the totalitarian regime. The language that you knew, your normal language. Now, this book, unfortunately, is just in French, but it's a classic. It's called La Langue des Bois, Wooden Language. In this book, the author analyzes the grammatical rules, or that languages as different as Chinese, Russian, and Romanian suffered when they were used for propaganda. And there are rules. And guess what? Those rules are applied now to whatever you read in Daily Mail or other fabulous newspapers. This presentation is too short to go through these details, and through these rules. But the point is, there are very few words. The vocabulary contracts. There are very few words. They are assigned to an ideology. Their meaning very often is distorted, and they are snippets like that, which are repeated all the time, and on purpose they are devoid of meaning. Brexit is Brexit. What does it mean? Draw me I don't know, explain it, make a map, what it is, an oval-ready deal, a white-red Brexit, blue Brexit, whatever. Now, in the context of the language change, words matter. And I'll give you here an example. This is a map of Romania, my country of origin, because UK is also my country. The red part there was taken by the Soviets after the Second World War. All these dots are various prisons, communist prisons, and the different signs tell you the story. So some of them are centers for re-education through torture. Some of them are extermination centers. Some of them are psychiatric prisons. Some of them are all sorts of prisons, yeah? Look at them, how many they are. More than 2 million people died in Romania, which is not a big country, during the communist regime in those prisons. As it happened, I grew up near one of these centers, and one of my uncles who were at the table spent quite some years in one of these points. Now, why is this important? I hate when this pain and the history of these people is captured by extreme right all over the world. These are the guys who say that they're anti-communist. I hate them. On the other side, there is this guy who seems very peaceful. He's a communist, you know. There are many people like him who don't want to know anything about the history of the communist countries. And usually, I cannot tell you the abuse I get on Twitter. sometimes on this topic. Because they say, you know, the communist that you lived through is not the real one. And I'm like, yeah, funny that. Give me another name. What was what we lived through? Can you find another name for what you're dreaming? Because I'm sorry, but that word is tainted, is consumed. Millions of people died under that. And that's me. I don't know, I was 18, 17. At the time, I was an enemy of the people, of the Romanian people. I was an enemy because my grandfather was an enemy and because my father was an enemy. And by, you know, this rule, I was an enemy too. Now, I'm an enemy of the people in the UK, apparently, and I haven't done anything, neither there, neither here. So words matter, they do have an impact. And these are the books I recommend you to read. And that's it. Oh, stop share. Yep.
Thank you. That was incredible. I think you could see, and if you just have a look now, you're talking through the chat. That's had quite some impact on people. Thank you. That really was, I'd love to hear you talk about this for longer. There was so much there. It felt like a whistle top, and there's some gaps. We'd love to hear some people talking about just how honest, open the story is. As a follow-up to Chris's talk, I thought that was, yeah, that was just great. Panelists, what did you think?
Are we allowed to swear at Map Camp?
It's allowed. It's allowed. There is a swearing tin, but yes.
Just listening to Andra's, we have the contrast between Andra's very first person and deeply emotional and evocative story, right behind Daniel's really clear and compelling, or Chris's clear and compelling explanation of, you know, we have the rational design and then the experienced and felt impact. And both of these stories are telling us how tightly constructed these worlds are and how difficult they are to get out of. And Andra, when you were speaking, there were some comments that you made that I just could not process, like they didn't even see it coming. They claimed they didn't know. And I find those true and debilitating.
I know.
I want to read some of these comments. Hey, Damien, I feel so desperate. This was sent to me, but I feel so desperate that she stood in a burning busking before and we're not paying attention to her. And others are pointing out the embers in our own house. Then she corrects that to say building. Andrew, this is from Bruno Poggi. Thank you, very brave. Sadly, the vast majority of people in developed countries have not had your experience nor your sensitivity to different systems. They don't appreciate the values and freedom. Totalitarian has no true loyalty. I like that. Appreciate this story. Feels so appropriate to what we're going through in the US. And it's getting to me just thinking about it, because the story you told about the chap who is a communist but doesn't know why and can't describe what he feels and is actually not open to the idea of understanding. It's felt like that for so many socio-political arguments that we think are important, whether it's race, gender equality, whether it's Brexit, how do we live? And that's something I think a lot of people have experienced, so hugely emotive. CV, how do you feel? I want to open this out to the floor. We have time. What would you like us to do?
Well, you mean in a question of, do we take the next 5 or 6 minutes to talk about what Andra questions Andra raised versus, yeah, I think we should stick with.
What you want to talk about, so I'm wondering either you know that it ties in, or we want to sort of separate the two.
No, I think we should stick with this a little longer.
Good, excellent. And I will make sure we get time for everybody. Last message here. Thanks, Andrea. Amazing talk, and would be very interesting to hear more of your thoughts. We've got a couple of questions immediately in Q&A. Evgeny asked, in what way do you see shortage as a means of control?
Oh.
When I ask the second one, and you can flow the two together, what is the best thing to do to counter? Is it local action? I'd encourage anyone who hasn't put a question in and is affected by what we just heard, just to put something in. If we don't deal with it now, we will later. Andrew.
Shortage as a means of control. Shortage takes time. Shortages take time. What to give you an example? To be active in the society, to have time to write an article, write to your MP, be a citizen who is involved in the life of the society, defend the institutions when they are attacked. You need to have time. If you spend time in the queue buying petrol, you don't do that. In Romania, which is a country with an amazing agricultural land, where if you drop 3 seeds, something grows, we didn't have any food. And it was on purpose. You would spend 3 hours per day in a queue for bread. You will spend, I don't know, probably once per week, because just then you would find some milk. I have no idea what my mom went through in order to put something on the table, because the shops look like that. They were empty. You could buy wine and, I don't know, tomato sauce or something like that. Because shortages take time, they take you out of doing something else. You know, even that Maslow pyramid, I mean, I'm not a fan of it, but you are stuck with a basis. Yeah, you need to solve the basis, and you never get into observing how these guys are stealing the country from your, you know, from near you. This is what is going on. This is how it's a mean of control. What was the other question? What we can do? What is the action? It's very much down at the individual level. I think it being wide open. Speak, don't stay isolated. You need to know who is around you. You would think this is a detail. No, it's not a detail. When people are isolated, they are afraid to speak. They are afraid to create anything which takes has an impact. And soon you will not be able to do it. It could be too late, you know. It's defending the institutions which are essential to democracy, and I don't mean being at the gate with a weapon. I mean paying for journalism, things like that. Write your MP, make your voice heard, things like that. It matters.
So look, there are lots and lots of comments. We're going to come back to this in the group discussion. I have one thing to ask, which I think you can answer quite quickly. For the UK, when is the point of no return? You've already shown some of the dots, and we're already down a journey. What's the signal that tells us, okay, we've really reached a point where it's going to be hard to turn back or change something?
We passed many points. The attack on justice and on the legal system, it's critical, and we see it again and again. We don't have time now to give you the example, but if you look in the past 5 years, you see that it happened again and again, and it's on purpose in order to concentrate as much executive power. It's painful to talk about this, because really UK, it's my country. I raise my children here. And I don't want to give up. And I see it, you know, that question, do you see it coming? Yes, I see it coming. I don't want yet to give up. And now I understand how my uncles ended up in prison. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce CV. We're going to come back to all of the discussions. You've just answered a question I had for Chris, which was, is it all part of culture? How do you see the two things as distinct? I think you just articulated exactly why it's not. CV.
Yes.
New to mapping, well, new to Wardley mapping. It turns out you've been mapping your whole life around two subjects. The way you described it was mapping how business can be done and mapping how feminism can be put into practice. And what we're trying to do now, what CV is trying to do, is to bring those two worlds together. Really would like you to welcome CV for stepping in and talking at an event like this, so focused around mapping, but really bringing a new idea, a new sort of set of concepts. So if you could just do a slightly longer intro so people get to know you and know a little bit about the context and inspiration for your talk today.
Okay, well, it was Kat who invited me to consider participating because she is very much a thinker outside the convention, looking for new ideas. And I've been studying feminism and also teaching entrepreneurship and business for a very long time, so like 30-ish years. And I am a former business school professor, and now I work as a consultant and a rabble rouser and a tool maker. I do want to start by just noting that Chris and Andra, in two very different ways, showed us how important this conversation is that we're having. This conversation about what concepts and what possibilities are put on the map for us and what are closed off for us based on the worldviews that are cycling around us, which is a very heavy way to say that how we think and where we see the world from really delimits and enables what we can go on to do. We tend to imagine, at least in a Western culture, that there's this God view, this objective place up there that looks down on a map and tells us what all the things are and where the boundaries are. And these are all fictions or cultural co-creations, if you will. And because they are that, they can be really scary and powerful, but they are also malleable. And so I am here to speak from a perspective that asks us to reimagine and question what is there on that map. So in this particular context, I feel like I'm here to be a feminist cartographer and talk about what could be on the map. And interestingly, when this session was sort of designed, it was designed as one size fits all. It's either communism or capitalism. And my thought was, string of expletives, gee, feminism isn't even on the map. And what will it take for us to put feminism or other anti-oppression, pro-flourishing perspectives? What will it take to see those in the maps of possibilities around us? Whether we're thinking about our personal level stuff or our relationships or our work teams or our organizations or our economies. What's it going to take to get that stuff on the map? And we feminists, advocates of feminism, talk about maps all the time. Here is a map that's very important to me. And this is a map of Turtle Island, which is the land from which I am speaking. And I am speaking from the traditional homelands and waterways of the Council of Three Fires. Those are the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi people. It's a land also called Chicago, and there's a little dot on the turtle picture that shows you where this land is. And as a feminist business person and advocate, I always start my talks by locating myself on this land with this territory acknowledgement, because this is a way to say that I, as a settler on this land, an unwelcomed settler, I acknowledge this position And I'm going to use my work from this place to challenge the very notions of oppression and domination that have made this situation possible, and to think about new ways to construct the world so that this map of the very same territory is understood differently. And when we're thinking about our conversation today, I don't have many maps, although I do have some sort of graphic relational illustrations of things. And here's a little bit of a path that I want to go through. First, just to talk about maps and economies, then talk about the feminism we're looking for, give you a sense of how feminism fits into these other systems. And then the most important part is to talk about what feminism puts on the map for us that hasn't been available to us in the worldviews that we've talked about before. And then we can talk a little bit about questions. But when I think about maps, I'm thinking about them both metaphorically and as the functional things, the functional tools that they are, whether they're cartographies or they're data representations or they're abstract connections of relationships. But we all have these maps that we use that tell us what to attend to. They tell us where to stop. They tell us where is too far. And they also pretend to represent some sort of accuracy, some sort of reality. We look at maps and we don't question the definitions underneath them, the choices that have been made. We forget that maps are political objects, and they're political objects with a goal, which is to shape the way that we see the world, ostensibly so that we can function more effectively together in it. I put a little bit of a question mark next to that one. So I want to talk about feminism as an alternative map that we can use to make our way through our personal lives, our collective lives, our economies, and our societies. The biggest problem, though, in talking about feminism is that no one knows what the fuck it is, right? And so if you look at somebody like me and you're like, North American white lady, kind of old, blonde hair, clearly she's going to pick up a copy of Lean In and tell me that this is feminism. And I'm like, no. I practice and I also advocate for a different kind of feminism that I call collective, inclusive, and transformational feminism. And this feminism, the definition of this feminism is that it's a movement for all people, not just people with vaginas or people who wear lipstick, but all people, to end sexism and all oppressions, all with an asterisk, to establish political, economic, and social equality with 2 asterisks, and then ultimately to create a world in which all people and all living things flourish. So if you understand this as the definition of feminism, it's to stop, it's to oppose oppression, and it's also to propose alternative ways of thinking about the world. I have 2 sets of qualifications in here. The first is the concept of all oppressions. I find that even though I say all oppressions, people don't believe me. And so I have to list them out. And so they start with racism, settler colonialism, heterosexism, classism, capitalism, and they go on from there. Any system that teaches us that some group of people is better than others and therefore has the right to rule is something that feminism is fighting. Then the other thing with the 2 asterisks is this notion of equality. We live in a world where the idea of equality has been deliberately diminished so that we think that equality is about the same treatment under the law, in society, whatever. And when feminists talk about equality, we're talking about equality of human value, a moral equality, that every human being is equal to every other human being. And in the most kind of advanced conversations of feminism, that every living creature, every living system is equally valuable. And when you start with that we're all of equal value, it really messes up how your map looks, because you have to respect that and honor that and enable that and build systems around that, because that's not the foundational assumption of most of our maps of how we should be in this world. So when I talk about collective, inclusive, and transformational feminism, I am drawing on a series of conversations, 300, 400, 1,000-year long conversations. And these are all conversations that have a particular kind of wisdom that I acknowledge in the work that I'm using. The first is that all of these traditions of feminism that I'm drawing from believe in the equal humanity and moral worth of all people and all living things. Not everything that's called feminism believes that. The feminism I draw from also envisions the flourishing of all people and all living things as the ultimate goal, and thus understands feminism as a group project. It's not something I want to do to empower myself to be the boss. Like, my goal as a feminist is not to be the CEO of ExxonMobil. And also the ultimate goal is to transform the matrix of oppressions, the system, interlocking, reinforcing system of oppressions, so that we can create a new world by putting feminist values into practice. Recently, I came across, so this is a book I think that if you're going to talk about incels, you need to read this book by Amiya Srinivasan. But she has a beautiful definition of feminism that opens up her book. And she says, feminism is a political movement to transform the world beyond recognition, to create a map that we haven't seen before, right? Feminism asks, what would it be like to end the political, social, sexual, economic, psychological, and physical subordination of women and females? And it answers, we do not know. Let us try and see. And that is the feminist project. So for us, it's about, we do not know. We know what we don't want on that map, and we are learning and figuring out what we do want on that map. And so I put together this, this is a map. I think tables are maps, right? They have like longitudes and latitudes, so they're maps. And I put together this table that tries to show some important comparisons between concepts that are on the map in capitalism and communism versus those that are on the map in feminism. And feminism, when we think about the goal of feminism, it's really flourishing for all living things. It's not about accumulating wealth and power. It's not about sameness and predictability and control. It's about something else. And this notion of flourishing or thriving, these are kind of big picture words that describe states of growth and joy and ease and challenge and satiation and sufficiency and abundance. So this is a different goal of like, what's the point of the world? The point of the world is not to figure out what kind of fences we can build. It's to figure out how we can all flourish. The core activities of a feminist economy or a feminist business or a feminist society are these. They are resourcing, they are recirculating, they are meeting needs. Another word for it is provisioning. If you are a feminist economist, you enter into the conversation saying, how do we work together so that everyone gets the resources that they need? How do we provide for each other? That's close, but not quite related to that concept of from each according to her abilities to each according to her needs. But that's part of it, right? It's understanding that each of us matters. And so we're different, and we have to figure out ways to make sure that we are all cared for in ways that are honorable. So that's the core activity of a feminist perspective. If you contrast that to capitalism and even to communism, like capitalism is about owning shit. It's about extracting value, and it's about concentrating value and power in the hands of a very, very small privileged group. It's about extracting and concentrating. That's what a capitalist system does. And everybody else, if you're not part of the group that's receiving the accumulation, you're the part that's being taken from. And that actually even sounds like something Marx would comment about, but that's what capitalism is. Then next to that, adjacent to that, is a different sort of set of activities that might be communism or socialism at its worst, which is about centralizing, distributing, and planning. It's about gathering up what is, organizing it, and moving it around. But it's not necessarily about creating abundance, because it's too focused on controlling. It's too focused on planning, and it's too focused on maintaining the power dynamics that we are told are supposed to be about everyone being taken care of equally, that we know is just bullshit. So when we think about what maintains those systems, over in the world of feminism, what maintains those systems are words you do not hear in the conversation about capitalism or the conversation about communism. And those are words like care and caring, words like regeneration, words like love, and words like ease. those are the attitudes or approaches or technologies that maintain a system like this. The only one that does overlap, and Andra talked about this, was the idea of democracy. And democracy, you can understand in a feminist context, is the way that we make decisions because everyone is equal. Everyone equally matters. And there are lots of different technologies of democracy. It doesn't have to be one person, one vote, or representation or whatever, but democracy is the way that everyone participates in the conversation about how we all get our needs met, how we all get resources from one place to another, how we circulate what needs to get circulated so that living creatures can not only exist, but thrive. And if you think about what maintains capitalism, it's a lot of ugly, I think, ugly behavior. It's winner take all competition. It's exploitation, taking advantage of people, both materially, emotionally, spiritually, every dimension. It's maintained by hierarchy, which is this idea of the master nexus of all systems of domination and privilege. And it's also maintained by, it's hard to see in this font, but by illegitimation strategies, by strategies that tell us lies about how the world works. And that's something that Chris was, both Chris and Andrew, when we talked about this before, were very focused on this notion that it's not a notion, it's a technology of misleading us by lying. So it could be wooden language that Andrew was describing before, but that's a way that capitalism is maintained. And then over in the communism part, it's also maintained by paternalism, this false benevolence that we're taking care of you and then you don't have to be responsible, and keeping people in this child position vis-a-vis the state, through control, through bureaucracy, and through hierarchy in general. So I realize that, this is a sort of a quick and dirty set of concentrations or concepts, but I think you can get the general gist of it, is that when we think of the goal of this kind of map, the core activities this map focuses us on and the ways that it gets maintained, we're talking about a whole lot of different stuff than would come up in a conversation about capitalism or a conversation about communism. So here we get to my net map. Are you ready? Because it's a real mind blower of a slide. Okay. Look, it has places and lines. I looked at Chris's map before when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, oh, I think I could do something vaguely like that. But these are the ideas that when we're thinking about feminism, these are the ideas that feminism as a worldview, as a politics, puts on the map. In the center is this idea of flourishing. That's what we are here to do. We may want to stay alive. We may want to procreate. We may want to leave a legacy. And while we are doing that, we want to feel comfort. We want to feel joy. We want to feel community. We want to feel belonging. We want to be, as humans, brought up to our best, but also as living things kind of brought up to our best. And so when we think about flourishing, on the one hand, there are these assumptions about how people interact. So we have equal worthiness, which means that we focus on quality relationships of mutuality and democracy because we're equally worthy. And therefore, we have to spend a lot of time caring for each other for times when we have the ability to care or we have the need to be taken care of. Because basically, all of us are born and need to be taken care of when we're children. And all of us, alas, die and need to be taken care of as we leave this earth. And we also get sick or are infirm or whatever in the middle. And then there are other times when, God willing, we are more able to care for each other. So we exist in this circulation of caring. Then on the other side, it's more about the activities that go into finding the stuff that we need to stay alive and to thrive, that are possibly less about the humanness and more about all the rest of the stuff. And these are the notion of provisioning, this focus on not buying and selling, but finding and providing what we need. Resourcing, which is kind of recognizing how things can be resources and valuing them as resources and renewing them as resources. Then thick value is this concept that is There's profit that we value, but there is also more. So we value care, we value love, we value belonging, we value comfort, we value being heard, we value art, we value beauty. How do we live in a world that provides all of this stuff to each other to thrive? Not just the money part or the grain, the bread or the wine, but all the rest of the stuff. And then ultimately the concept of equity, recognizing that while we are all equally worthy and valuable as human beings, we have different abilities and capabilities and situations, and that in a truly just world, we find ways to meet each set of need to bring all of us closer to a place where we can flourish. And that's true not simply for human beings, but also for other kinds of living things. So the big picture is that feminism puts all this stuff on the map. And I think with the exception of the word democracy, we didn't hear those words before in our conversation. Now, it is true that we were talking about the really hard parts, looking underneath the lies of capitalism and of communism. And this picture of feminism is still positive because we're still trying to make this all happen. But this is the stuff that we're looking for. This is the stuff we're trying to get to. This is the stuff we're trying to build high-speed train rails between. So this is the world, the map of feminism. And I think it should be on our maps. I think it blows my mind that it's not in our like set of possibilities, and it should be, because it's not just one of these things. It's a conversation, it's a story, it's a set of theories that brings them all together. So it's really a pretty well drawn map if we pull it out of the drawer and stick it up on our wall.
Thank you so much. That is just first thought. This the map. Okay, a map needs to be useful, and where we're talking about extremely complex known systems with very direct interactions, like the computer systems I deal with, there you need to have so much more rigor in the architecture of the map. What you're telling us about, this is something that's human, that's accessible to absolutely anybody, and there's not one of the words on here that needs explaining. So I think this is a super useful map, and I don't think you need to go into much more. We can call it a chart, a representation, you know, for all the purists here. But certainly I think it's really, really useful. Wow. So last year, me versus we, it became a track this year. There was a general emergent theme, which was about baking in care into our conversations around planning, particularly economic planning. In so much of what we do, we simply would, you know, pretty much bolt on to an economic plan, which is entirely focused on enriching people, etc., and then saying, well, okay, here's another thing we can do, and that might be enough to bring us enough votes to push us over the edge. And really being honest about how we evaluate every aspect of funding things, of measuring success. What is the primary thing we're looking for? Is it for everybody to be happy, or are we happy for some to be happy if we make sure we make money? So it's really interesting that you've just brought this, given we've met, what, twice before, and now seeing this come together, I'm really delighted with what you've put together. I really hope you're here next year to expand on that, because we only have 7 official minutes to go through questions, not just for you, but any additional for Chris and Andrew. And what I'm hoping is that everybody who's watching, who's been affected, for me, I've been affected by all 3 talks. I personally care a lot about disabled rights, and then also disability equality, and then also just because of my personal experience, it's always been a focus around racial equality. I had a conversation that caused me to consider just how long the systemic biases have been built in when we talk of gender imbalance compared to my specific experience of race. And I realized, you know what? This is a much bigger problem, and it helps to fix mine. And I think I got through halfway through your book, and then just the course of the last.
And you like crashed, yeah.
No, well, it's really Map Camp and the lead up to it, and it's Q4 in sales world. So believe me, I want to really get into this subject and make sure I understand it, because I don't think I'm being effective as a human being until I do. So look, we've got 5-6 minutes left. I'm going to just open to the floor. I've not been looking for questions. Sarah.
Can I answer Ben's question? Because I think I've got a suggestion about how values can be more than the nice words we say.
Yes, if it was anyone else, I'd say yes, absolutely. Let me just check. It's Ben. No, that's fine.
Okay. So essentially, there are three things that we do. The first one is that we look to affirm, to acknowledge, to notice. Anytime we see someone putting into practice something that seems like a value. So when somebody says, I'm just exhausted, I don't think I can keep meeting, we'll say, well, we value your whole humanness as a person. So let's, take some time out and let you go take care of that. So one is to notice and name things. The second one is we often in the feminist businesses that I work with, we play this game where we say, how do you do that in a way that enables agency? Or how do you do that in a way that's more democratic or that opens up to more voices? So we just ask that question of how can we do that? And we try to be really experimental, because every step forward is one better, it's getting closer. So we think a lot about how we might demonstrate it. And then the third is that I often look to other places where I see people putting this stuff into practice in really beautiful ways. And so for me, I look at things like anti-oppression design, design thinking with a twist. Or I look at feminist technology and the designs of a feminist internet, because they're trying to do the same things that I'm trying to do, but they're doing it in software design, whereas I'm doing it in a business. And an example for that I was thinking of for you all is this is like one of my favorite books in the world, and it's called Data Feminism. They propose 7 different principles of data feminism, and then they give beautiful examples of how these principles are put into practice or not in data collection processes. And I just want to recommend this, because if you're thinking about maps, like in the Wardley mapping sense, it's so close to how we think about data. And so it's very adjacent to your stuff. And I think it would be really fabulous stuff to think about. So I'll stop there.
You have enough time to also answer Sarah's question. I'll read it out. As an aside, I love your map, +1. Mm-hmm. That was me last year. She was a first-time speaker last year, and your messages. She says, how much genuine traction have you felt in boardrooms? This is impact outcome. And even if not, when do you expect to see that? So if not as much as you'd like, what's the pattern you expect to see?
I think that boardrooms are like the imprisoned folks in Romania. They can't even see it. These words are not accessible to them. As we say in science, that hypothesis is not available to them. I kind of say fuck boardrooms, because they're so far away and so deeply entrenched and so fortified by their own privilege. That's why I spend my time with entrepreneurs and with smaller ecosystems, because I feel like I can be more effective there. I think that something else or someone else will take down large corporations. I hope it is the climate movement. And then we'll get in there to talk about some other things that are also important. But I have given up on boardrooms, because they ask me to dumb things down so hard that they're, taking a butter knife to a gunfight.
Yeah.
Sorry about the metaphor.
I'm wondering, just 2 minutes left, Chris and Andrew, I kept seeing specs, ideas from your talks, just wondering what you thought.
So I would say something perhaps I don't believe I'm saying it, in the defense of the boardroom, but it's not the defense per se, it's just their position, because they are far from regular workers. At the same time, their reality looks slightly different, because they have to look at the external competition. And it's kind of this duality of nature. And for me, it's also very painful, because I would love to live in this particular way as is described on this slide. But there is the other part of me, which is saying that there are other people who may be much more competitive than I am, and I must be ready to confront them. So it's like this duality. I mean, I started my talk from talking about duality, but this is very hard to maintain. That this is, I should behave in this way to these people and in this way to these people, just because they are in my group or something like that. And this is, yeah, just a comment.
Coming up to time. So Andrew, unless you have something very quick to finish with, I was just going to say thank you to everybody. Any thoughts? Well, actually, I can't see you whether you're muted or not. Andrew, I want to hear from you on what you've just heard. Yes, it's okay, as Steph says. So we've got a minute if you have any thoughts.
I do relate a lot to the vision that CV put in front of us. My way of surviving, if you want, in the boardrooms and everywhere, is to maintain a network, a personal network of people who see these things that CV put in front of us. Because people are out there. I think the danger is when we stay very isolated with our dreams or view for a world and how it should function. You know, I think it's okay if we don't have a big platform to convince, I don't know, millions of people of something. But if you have a community around you with whom you can move around those lines, you are a lucky person. Yeah. You are on mute.
Damien.
Amazing, amazing. I've just plugged a book. It's called How Boards Work. And it's by a friend of mine. I'm really, it's so much of what you just talked about around boards is in there. So if anybody's interested, I want to just do a quick word of thanks to everybody who's attended today. It's been a long day, but really great. There's lots of content. If you've been to 4 talks, well, you've missed a hell of a lot in terms of tracks. So please go back, watch the other content. There's lots and lots of cross-pollination between the talks, and I'm actually going to go back and make sure I watch everything. Thank you to our speakers, especially those speaking for the first time or at short notice. You've done really well. Hope to see you all back next year. And thanks to everybody who's helped organize. It's been a really great day. Absolutely honored to be part. And a Steph, the VFairs team. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Everyone.